is Gladys Gachanja, and of course this is your current affairs one-stop shop for both matters within and without the country. Now we will be joined by our different colleagues around the county, bringing us up to speed to matters that are making headlines in their regions. But before we get to it, just to tell you that we shall be having a very interesting conversation today as a core topic, and I'm talking about rheumatoid arthritis. Now this is something that most of you have seen people living with it or are already living with it, and it will be interesting to actually understand this autoimmune disease that actually affects more women than men. Now, more details coming your way in a bit, just as my rheumatologist, the doctor, is already in studio, and of course somebody living with rheumatoid arthritis will be here to tell us more about the same. But for now, let's look at some of the stories that made headlines last evening and are bound to actually react or elicit reaction into the day. The East African Portland Cement Company is set to lay off all its employees as it struggles to stay afloat amidst financial woes. The company says it is making losses of up to 8 million shillings per day, putting it on an unsustainable path. Now, since August last year, more than 700 employees have been laid off at the cement maker, and in June this year, 220 workers were fired, leaving the company with a little over 600 workers who have now all been sent home. Elsewhere, Stanbic Bank has confirmed that it will lay off 255 workers in a move aimed at reducing the bank's costs.
A massive layoff is looming at the East African Portland Cement as the company looks to turn the tide on its performance. In an attempt to cushion its employees from the adverse effects of the job loss, the company intends to make the following payments, among others: compensation of 30 days for each year worked, payment of all accrued leave days by each employee affected, and gratuity to the date of the laying off. Years of declining sales and a fast deteriorating loss position have taken their toll on the listed cement manufacturer, pushing into the extreme of cost-cutting measures. The company, which sank to a 3.6 billion shilling loss in the full year ended June 2018, is now clutching at the straws of staff layoffs as it seeks to remain afloat. The Trade Cabinet Secretary, Peter Munya, has now said the government is supporting the embattled company in its bid to turn around its fortunes.
A cabinet decision was passed to allow Portland to offload some of its assets, to retire some of the debts that are weighing it down.
The looming layoffs add on to the headwinds rocking the cement sector, with Athi River Mining having been placed under administration in August 2018 over failure to meet its creditors' demands. The shares of ARM were subsequently suspended from trading at the Nairobi Securities Exchange, with the company's assets sold to the National Cement Company for 5 billion shillings. And still on the cement sector, Bamburi Cement saw its operating profit for the full year ended December 2018 plunge by 835 million shillings. The company has decried a cost-inhibitive business environment which saw its costs rise by 15% to 36 billion shillings.
The proposed compensation may at least take care of the needs of the affected employees, but after that, East African Portland Cement still has to address the needs of investors who will be looking to see how the present proposed restructuring will be addressing the need to unlock investor value at the stock market, and the share price has been falling, meaning investors have been losing value. Julian's Amboko, NTV.
Elsewhere, the Director of Public Prosecutions, Nuruddin Haji, has ordered for the arrest of businessman Humphrey Kariuki and 8 other employees of Africa Spirits Limited and Wow Beverages for various charges. Now, Kariuki and his companies are accused of evading tax worth 41.5 billion shillings from 2014. Also in the list are the Director of Africa Spirits Limited, Peter Jenga Kuria, the company's tax manager, Kefa Gakure, and the Assistant Production Manager, Sethu Pabu. Now, directors of Wow Beverages, Stuart Gerald and Robert Thinji Murithi, are also to be arrested. A total of 7 charges have been preferred against the accused, including tax evasion, possession of counterfeit stamps and fraud. In January, a multi-agency team raided the premises and found 80 drums of suspected uncustomed ethanol, reels of counterfeit excise stamps, and 41,000 cartons of assorted alcoholic drinks affixed with counterfeit stamps. The prosecution and defense in the Aror and Kimorer Dam multi-billion shillings graft case failed to agree on how to handle documents that the case will rely on. The prosecution insists on conveying the evidence, which numbers into hundreds of thousands of documents in soft copy, while the defense prefers the traditional hard copy. NTV's Brenda Wanga with more.
It's going to be a trial like no other in the history of the country's fight against graft, not just by virtue of those in the dock, but also the multitude of work that will go into prosecuting and defending the case.
Evidence arranged.
A total of 142 witnesses are expected to take the stand, witnesses that will give context to thousands of documents that the prosecution will rely on its case.
The documents we are supplying in this case number in 500,000. At the minimum, 500,000 documents divided into 30 sets at the minimum of 36 folios at the minimum, each with 15,000 documents.
In line with the court's procedures, the prosecution supplied the documents to the defense in soft copies.
We were given the indication that they are contained in the CD.
And it is here that the battle lines have been drawn between the prosecution and the defense. The defense say nothing short of hard copies of the documents will do in the trial.
Reading 500,000 pages is actually forcing us to do that is trying to delay the trial.
Instead of studying these documents, they're already crying wolf. We recommend strongly that they first read these documents.
The defense further argues that asking them to download the files onto hard copies will hurt their clients financially.
When the state brings a man or woman to the dock, the accused person has no obligation to facilitate his own prosecution.
We have no legal obligation to provide them with printed paper documents numbering in 500,000.
The chief magistrate is expected to rule on just how the documents should be conveyed after a second mention of the case on the 18th of next month. Brenda Wanga, NTV.
Kiambu Ferdinand Waititu's bid to return to office has been dealt a major blow after the High Court upheld the Magistrate Court's ruling blocking him from accessing the county offices. Now, Justice Ngenya further held that Waititu, even though deemed innocent until proven guilty, ought to have brought honor and dignity to the electorate, which elevated him to the position. Now, Justice Ngenya has also rejected Waititu's 15 million shilling cash bail review. He says the charges against the Kiambu County boss, along with his co-accused, are serious, and the ruling by the High Court comes as a major setback for Waititu, who is in a superiority contest with his deputy James Nyoro. Nyoro has taken over Waititu's role until his graft case is heard and determined. Now to something that has been making headlines. The standoff over the division of revenue bill continues with no end in sight after the Speaker of the National Assembly, Justin Muturi, barred members from debating the Senate's amended division of revenue bill. In a written communication delivered by his deputy, Moses Chaboy, Muturi says that the National Assembly reserves the exclusive constitutional mandate to determine the allocation of national revenue between the two levels of government.
I am persuaded that the Division of Revenue Bill, Senate Bill number 13 of 2019, offends not only the spirit of the Constitution, but also the custom and traditions of this House and comparable parliamentary jurisdictions, which Standing Order 1-2 obligates me to abide by.
And back to the corridors of justice, a story that made headlines several months ago, and Kenya Sevens rugby players Frank Wanyama and Alex Olaba have been found guilty of gang-raping musician Wendy Kemunto on the night of February 10th, 2018. The two were convicted by Nairobi Chief Magistrate Martha Mutuku and will be sentenced today. Olaba and Wanyama had been released on a 500,000 shillings cash bail each after denying the charge. Kemunto accused the two of taking advantage of her by getting her drunk and taking her to their apartment in Highrise, where they took turns at her. Now, Kemunto claims she conceived as a result of the ordeal and decided to expose the rugby players when they refused to take responsibility for their actions. But the players accused Kemunto of extortion after a night of consensual sex. Well, we shall be following that sentencing in court, and our reporter will be giving us details of the same as and when they are ready with the same. For now, let's shift gears to the core conversation of today on NTV Today, rheumatoid arthritis. And I believe this is something you probably have seen, maybe did not know what it's called. And we shall be informing you more about it, because those that live with this condition can tell you it is not an easy road, and definitely the infrastructure, in as far as the health infrastructure to help those living with this needs to be improved to help them along with this. Now, before I introduce you my guests in studio, let's get to understand a little bit about rheumatoid arthritis. Call it Rheumatoid Arthritis 101. And let me just touch on the fact that it is an autoimmune disease in which the body's immune system actually mistakenly starts attacking your joints. Now, rheumatoid arthritis can also affect other parts of your body, including the skin, your eyes, your lungs, your heart and blood vessels. And also doctors right now do not really know what causes this, but most often than not, this is actually said to be of genetic. Genetic component appears to be likely, but of course, the environmental factors that play into this. Now, before I get into the details of it, let me okay, I guess my graphics are now ready. There we go. Rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune disease in which the body's immune system mistakenly attacks the joints. Now, to the next, rheumatoid arthritis can also affect other parts of your body, including the skin, your eyes, your lungs, your heart, and even your blood vessels. And doctors don't really know what causes rheumatoid arthritis, although a genetic component appears likely. And the symptoms, and maybe this is what will sound familiar to you, is that it involves joint pain, joint tenderness, swelling, redness, warmth, stiffness, fatigue, loss of appetite, and these are just some of the symptoms. Now, get this, and this is what stands out quite a bit. Women are up to 3 times more likely to develop the condition than men. Well, let's get to know more about rheumatoid arthritis. And in studio with me, of course, we have Dr. Eugene Genga, who is a rheumatologist. And of course, we have Koki, who is living with rheumatoid arthritis. Thank you for joining me this morning. Now, I'll start with you, Dr. Of course, the first question is, what's the difference between rheumatoid arthritis and, say, osteoporosis?
Okay. So, rheumatoid arthritis, like rightfully said, is an inflammatory disease. So basically, the immune system is unable to recognize the normal self versus the germs. So what happens is it attacks everything. So primarily for rheumatoid arthritis, the main focus is the joints, particularly the soft the hands, the small joints to the hands and the wrist. Height presents with swelling, joint pain, fatigue, and you get a lot of morning stiffness, versus osteoarthritis, which most people are more familiar with. Osteoarthritis is more common with the elderly. So basically, this is basically wear and tear. What the example I give to my patients, like for a car, you have
Yeah.
to change the shocks, you have to change the tires. Versus in a human being, the joint, the cartilage, the skin that lines the joint usually breaks down over time, and then develop now osteoarthritis.
Okay, and while we're still clarifying on the definition of the same, there's some who would say rheumatoid arthritis is closely related, if not the same, with gout.
Not exactly, not exactly. Gout is more of lifestyle. It's more common in men. The age group is about 30 going upwards, and it's more associated with the alcohol, nyama choma. There's a bit of genetics.
Symptoms?
Symptoms now with gout is a bit different. Gout, you have migratory oligo, meaning one joint, versus rheumatoid, which is multiple joints. And usually for gout, usually the big joints like the toe, the knee, isolated today. Another day is the other side. It keeps moving. Rheumatoid is constant and it's throughout.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Now that we're talking about the fact that it affects up to 3 times women more than it does men, Kajuju, at this point, you can let us know about your experience. When were you diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis?
I started getting the symptoms when I was 7 years.
7?
Yeah, 7 years, which no one really knew what was happening because mostly affecting older people than it does young people.
Yes.
So no one really, because it started with the skin, and so it took me 3 years to actually find a doctor who is a specialist for rheumatoid arthritis. Yeah.
Okay, 7 years old. Yes. When you think about arthritis of whatever nature, because we know there are many forms of arthritis, you relate it with age. The older you are, the more susceptible you are. Yes. Explain how a 7-year-old is dealing with rheumatoid arthritis.
Okay. Usually, what I tell the patients is that at different age groups, we have different causes of arthritis. And I also give the example that even animals like dogs, cats also get arthritis. So as long as you have a joint and it's painful, tender, you have arthritis. Just that now in the younger age group, there are different causes. So usually for the younger age group, are more of the inflammatory, which are the rheumatoid arthritis. There's a special one called spondyloarthropathy, one called reactive arthritis, versus the elderly, which people are more accustomed to is now the wear and tear, where the joint breaks down, which is more common in the big joints, but like the knee, the back, the shoulder. So most people usually associate arthritis with the osteo, rather than knowing that there are other causes of arthritis. Yes.
So how would you explain maybe her causes, and maybe she can tell us this. Is rheumatoid arthritis or arthritis of any nature in your family?
Yes, my dad used to experience a little of back pain, but it wasn't anything serious because he's never been treated for arthritis or rheumatoid arthritis. So, but then now I think so it was passed down to me, which now came out more in a very different way than it did affect him.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that confirms the fact genetic component that is actually associated with it. And how much of it then does environmental factors feed to it?
So, okay, generally there's a 7% chance of genetic, like mother, uncle, and all that. So in terms of environment, so when you have the genetic predisposition, meaning you're at risk, so now the environment now contributes. And how it contributes? Through infections mainly, like viral infections can do that, bacterial infections can do that. Other ways which the environment can contribute, but more to lifestyle, smoking. Cigarette smoking has been associated with rheumatoid arthritis. Diet has also been associated, particularly food that have high omega-6, which would be like the fried foods, a lot of fat, even sunflower oil have been associated with rheumatoid arthritis. But what we believe is that it's not just the environment. We believe that it's multiple things coming together. So there's genetics, there's environment, there's an unknown component we don't know, and a bit of lifestyle. Yeah.
Okay, we touched on the fact that the symptoms include joint pain, joint tenderness, swelling, redness, warmth, stiffness. Kajuju, for you, what were the symptoms?
So my symptoms was my skin turned. I became very dark. and then it was dry, and then it would crack at one point. So over time, I was treated for skin disease, not knowing it was rheumatoid arthritis. And then now I started experiencing joint pains. I couldn't walk well. I couldn't, my hands, in the morning when I have to wake up and go to school, it was a struggle because you have to, before my hands get moving or it was crazy. So that is when now like the stiffness, the swelling, that is when after now I started getting such symptoms. Yeah.
Now, Dr. before I probe more into that, explain this. What is joint warmth?
Joint warmth. So the way we differentiate different kinds of arthritis, usually we categorize either inflammatory or non-inflammatory. So inflammatory include things like the rheumatoid and the gout. So when you have those two conditions, inflammatory, the joint becomes swollen, and there's certain chemicals that are released in your body that makes more blood to come there, try and counteract what is going on, and becomes what? A warm joint. Yeah.
Okay. Now back to you, Kajuju. I look at your hands, and if we can zoom into that, why your hands before you were diagnosed like normal, and then they started degenerating?
Yes, they did. They were